And now officially, hello everyone. Hi everyone. Thank you very much for joining us. Remember to have your microphones off so it doesn't interfere with the presentations. Just one second. Who is that person? I can see him. There you go. Oh no, it's on again. Remember you have your microphone off. Mm, there you go. It's on mute. Well, as I was saying, thank you very much for joining us. We are in our last session, our last webinar, this time with Rachel Martin. We would like to say thank you to the CCPA once again, also the Instituto de Formación Docente. They were very supportive with this initiative. And I'll let Rachel Martin, who was recently, I would say recently here in Paraguay, she visited us for our first edition of a teacher's camp, and we're going to be talking about teaching platforms and monitoring students' progress online. So, Rachel, all yours.
All right, thank you, Herman. So good afternoon, everyone. I'll just start by introducing myself just a teeny tiny bit here. So I am Rachel Martin, and I'm from the city of Seattle. So lots of things end up being said in Seattle. If you ever watched Grey's Anatomy or Frasier or some of those movies, that's my hometown. And I like to put these two pictures up here because this is where I'm from. And I actually used to live in a short building, kind of hidden by one of these tall buildings, pretty close there. And then this is where I live now. So these days I live in Montana. And as you can see, they're pretty different settings. I always like to share that so people can see some of the variety of the geography and different regions that we have in the US. Something that they do have in common is they're both pretty mountainous regions. So I like to go outside. I like to be out hiking when I can, not right now, obviously. But this here, this is one of my photos. I took this last fall, and maybe you can see the deer, little baby deer kind of camouflaged in the grass. So I just wanted to put that up there to introduce myself a little bit because I think where you're from shapes you a lot in the places you get to see. And as I was building this presentation, I was thinking about a lot of my past experiences with distance education. So I have been an online student, and I'm also currently, like all of you are, an online teacher. So thinking to those experiences, I've had online classes that were fantastic, where I learned a lot, and I've had ones where I finished them. So, there's always a range, and I think we can pick from our experiences both online and in teaching face-to-face to build these classes. So I'll tell a lot of stories today. I also might tell you some stories about places where I've been before. So up until the middle of February, I was living in Lima, Peru. I was there on an exchange. And before that, I spent a school year in Senegal. Before that, I taught for a bilingual French school. And like Herman said, I had the really good fortune before my time in South America got cut short to be in Paraguay. I got to visit in February to work with a teacher camp and then see a little bit of the country. So I really want to thank the embassy. I want to thank everyone involved with inviting me here today. So let's jump in. We are talking about distance learning. We're also talking about online education. And I just wanted to put both of those terms out there because they aren't the same thing. Distance learning or remote learning has existed for a really long time. And sometimes that has happened with people mailing materials back and forth or listening to a radio program or watching TV. So there's a lot that we can learn from the field of distance education, from distance learning, because it has a history. Online education is, of course, one specific field within that. And I think that's what most of us are trying to do right now, what I'm here to talk about today with the different platforms that we can use. I put a blank on here for another space, though, because this was a very unexpected situation. Just like distance learning has existed for decades, online education has existed for a while, and some people have specialized in that. And like I said, I've taken classes when I was a student in an online setting. Most of us were not specializing in that until very recently. I had the good fortune of working in that before coronavirus, but still it's a relatively new thing for many of us. So I've heard teachers refer to it, rather than saying we're doing online education, some people have been saying we're doing emergency quarantine teaching. And I put that out there just to say, as I go through this presentation, I'm going to present a lot of different options, some of which include more engagement with your student and some with less. Of course, we want more and more engagement as possible. And as the staying at home and teaching online and teaching remotely is going to be the normal for a while for this school year, we'll see how it builds into the future. Obviously, we want to become practitioners. We want to become good at online education. So maybe we're somewhere in between these two now. We were thrown into this unexpectedly, and we're moving from just emergency quarantine teaching to practicing online education. So some of the platforms that I'm going to talk about today, they all kind of fall into one of three categories. So we have learning management systems, we have meeting software, so live meeting software, or we have other tools, which can be high or low tech. Learning management systems, we also call them LMS. You'll see that a lot in my slides. That's a platform, an internet platform where you can store and make resources available to students. That's where you can track their progress. You can give them links to outside resources. You can post assignments. One of the great benefits of this, actually an advantage of over face-to-face teaching, is that your students have access to those assignments and those resources all the time. When we're talking about giving feedback, it's worth remembering that most learning management systems have a discussion board feature or a messaging or a live chat feature, so they can be a way that we can communicate back and forth as well. Let me jump into that second category, excuse me. Live meeting software. Well, you're in one right now, so I know you all know this. They are how we do synchronous work. When we want to get everyone together in one place at the same time, you have the video, you have the audio, you have the screen share. You've been hearing about this for the last couple of weeks on these webinars. They have the breakout rooms that we can use. There's the chat, which everyone was saying hi in earlier. And often they have the video recording feature, so that can be helpful for students who can't join you live. When I'm saying other tools, these are the sorts of things I'm talking about. There might be outside websites or apps that help your students learn. There might be other ways that you use to contact students, things that you use to stay organized that are high tech, or things that you use to stay organized that are low tech. So we are going to go into our first round of breakout rooms here. In just a moment, you're going to get an invitation to join a breakout room with a couple other teachers that are here today. Once you get into that breakout room, I'd like you to answer these three questions. You might need to take a picture of it before you go in because you won't be able to see this in your breakout rooms. But I'd like you to discuss what platforms are you using or have you used? Are you using a learning management system, something where you post the files and post the assignments? Are you doing live meetings? Are you using other tools? As you talk about that in your small groups, try and make a list if you can. And then if you have time, before we bring you back to the main session, try and come up with what's your favorite feature in some of those platforms. All right, Herman, are they ready to go?
Yes, they should see the invitation in their screens.
Fantastic. All right, so click on join. Go chat with some of your colleagues. I'll see you back here in a few minutes. If you're still here in the main channel, check your screen, see if you have an invitation so you can go to one of the break rooms. chat with a couple other teachers about which platforms you're already using, which category they might fall into. All right, looks like we still have a couple of people joining us here, getting their audio connected. We've just been chatting about the different systems, the different platforms that we use. So right now, most of the participants have headed out to break rooms, trying to make a list. What are some of the ones they've used that are LMSs, that are live meetings, that might be other tools? All right, I think we're going to go ahead and close those breakout rooms, bring everyone back here to the main room if we can.
Okay.
All right, thank you. All right, as you come back to the main room, make sure you turn your microphone back off. You can turn your camera off if you'd like. And maybe share in the chat if you could share some of the platforms that your group was talking about. As you come back into the main channel, you might want to turn your camera back off. You're welcome to leave it on, but we are recording.
Let me laugh.
Welcome back to the main channel. Welcome back, everyone. Do we just about have everyone in here now? All right, so what were some of the learning management systems that you were talking about in your small groups? What were some of the platforms? I might have some of them listed on the slide here, but what are ones that were popular with your group? Is anyone using, okay, some people are using the Google Classrooms, Edmodo, Schoology, Edmodo, Google Classroom, Zoom, Schoology, Google Classrooms. Someone said Teams, okay. Learning about Moodle. You never stop learning about Moodle. Yes, Moodle would be a learning management system. Answering one of the questions there, yes, Moodle would be a learning management system because that's usually where you store files, you make them available to students, you can organize them by assignment, by module, by week. Oh, someone said live videos on YouTube. That's a good one. I missed that one on here. That should be on my list. And what about some of those other tools, those outside apps you might use, ways you stay organized? Oh, someone mentioned Discord. Yes, Discord. Closed groups on Facebook. Quizlet might be one of them. Great. Okay, so I'm glad to see all these ideas bouncing around. And hopefully, as you're naming off these platforms, you can kind of think which one of the three categories they might go in. Because when we start thinking about which category they go in, we think how we can use them. And I say, don't, even though we're teaching online, don't forget the physical things you can use to organize yourself. I mean, there isn't any reason you can't use a lesson book, or you could use your sticky notes. Yeah, perfect. So when we talk about distance learning, what are the essentials we need? We need a way for students to access their assignments. We need a way for students to access the resources that they need to complete those assignments. Whether that is a textbook, whether that is a video, whether that is a link, a chart. We need a way for students to ask for help or for clarification. And we need a way for teachers, hopefully, to verify that students are ready to move on, that they're actually learning what we hope they're learning. So kind of those four things. So when we think about the learning management software, or learning management system, excuse me, a meeting software or other tools, we can kind of start connecting the dots here. Well, what could we use a learning management system for? That could be one way that we get assignments to students. It might be where we host some of the resources. Depending on the system, we might use it to clarify, to answer questions back and forth. We might be using it as a way to verify that they're meeting the objectives, especially if we're using a gradebook feature, if we're using that to keep track of what's been completed. The meeting software depends on, that might be one of our resources. It can be a great way, depending on how you have it set up, for students to ask for help. If you have time in the class, if you're doing it as a two-way discussion and not just a one-way webinar, that really depends on the size of the class. Maybe you are having the students demonstrate their understanding. They're actually speaking or doing a skit or a role play, or they're answering questions. You could check their progress when you're in a live meeting. And of course, the other tools can help us in many different ways. So really, the key to teaching with an online platform to me is getting organized. Looking at these four and thinking, which ones am I strong on? Which ones do I need to add a little bit of a plan so that I'm ready to do this? One of the first things that you have to plan for in a learning management system is if you're going to flip your class or not. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about the idea of a flipped classroom, but basically a flipped classroom means instead of the teacher introducing the information and then the students go away from class and practice with it. In a flipped classroom, the students learn about the information for the first time away from class, and then they come and they apply it in the classroom. You can do this with an online class, but you don't have to. You can do this with a face-to-face class, but you don't have to. It's another option. But when you're planning your assignments or when you're planning your units in a learning management system, in those platforms, you have to decide, do they see the work before they come and talk to me? Or do we start the topic, start the new function in class, and then they go work on it more on their own? So just thinking, which one comes first? You could do it either way. I try and make it consistent though, because if you jump back and forth, maybe your students won't know if they were supposed to understand this, if they thought they'd covered it. Just pick which way you want to do it. So the real question here is, how do we know if they've learned the information? When we're talking about the online learning environment, when we're talking about using one of these platforms, we can really measure it two different ways. We can check and see if they've covered the content, or we can build objectives and see if they're meeting those objectives. Now, obviously, these are the same choices that we have in a face-to-face classroom. And I think all of us want to be teachers where our students are really being very functional users of English. They are meeting all those objectives. But sometimes in the online environment, we have to do a little bit of a reality check and balance the two. So let's talk about covering content first. And I just want to, this is what I was saying earlier, how much are we doing emergency quarantine teaching versus we're doing online education. We're spanning that gap and we're getting there. We are becoming really good online teachers as we get more practice. But some of these strategies I'm going to talk about are a lot less time consuming, and some of them are a lot more time consuming. And so I'm going to kind of put them out here on the spectrum. And what I want you to do is think, what, with your current system, with your current class, how you have it set up, where do your practices fall on the spectrum? And it's okay if you're over here on the less time consuming. Maybe you have a huge class, or maybe you don't have a reliable way to communicate back and forth with your students yet. But wherever you are on the spectrum, maybe you can find one little trick or one little way to move closer to the other end. That's my goal for today. We'll just see what the different options are that are out there and which ones suit the context where you're working. So when we're talking about covering content and checking that your students have actually done the work, seen the videos, done the assignments, covered what you put out there, accessed it, there's a whole range of options. On one end, students progress through at their own rate. You basically just gave them the packet, digitally probably, but you gave them the information, and you don't really find out as the teacher what happened. Unfortunately, this happens a lot with online learning, and that's even happening here in the States, where a lot of teachers aren't hearing much from their students. There's kind of a breakdown in communication. So you're really hoping that they're working through it, but you don't have a way to check. A little bit better would be if the students can mark complete. So maybe that's built into your learning management system, or maybe they just let you know when they finished a unit or a module. They could check it off or keep a log. Again, it's not the best, but at least now we're finding out, self-reporting, where the students are. A step closer to the right here would be if the progress is marked automatically, or if they have to interact with the materials, if they actually have to take a quiz or do maybe a matching game or something where you can see automatically, oh yes, I know they accessed this page. If you've ever taken a MOOC like on Coursera, a lot of the Coursera MOOCs fall in this range right here because they keep track when you click through the pages, or you have to answer quick questions in the middle of a video. So that's a system where it can track and see if the student has made the progress. Then as we move up here toward the more ideal, but the much more time consuming, we have students complete assignments that would have been impossible without looking at the material. So however the assignment is structured, you know they had to have covered it because they needed to use the materials to complete the assignment. Or ideally, a teacher could check and grade every assignment. We'll talk about some of the reasons why that might not be realistic sometimes, but that would be our top choice. If we were checking in with them, we had back and forth feedback, of course we would like to be in that situation. Let's talk a little bit about the second option though, because objectives and really using the language, that's our goal. So just like in a face-to-face classroom, it's really the same process here. If we want to measure if our students are meeting the objectives, we need to be really careful about defining them. What are they doing? What do we want them to do with the language? What sort of supports do they have? And what's our standards? So those same things that we would apply in a face-to-face classroom, we just think of, again, as we're writing it to be online. What's great about the online environment is you can have your students create something real. They can use their English to create something that they show or they post. Using different social media channels, or even just using your learning management system, they can create something and then share it with you, or share it with their classmates, or share it with the broader world. They could share it with the public if they wanted to. Of course, there are some challenges in this. You don't know how much the students are doing their own work. There are definitely issues of access sometimes. I know that isn't settled for a lot of people as far as if your students can even access the learning management system yet. Hopefully that'll become smoother as time goes on. And these can take a while for teachers to grade, which again, if you have 30 students is one thing. If you have 100 or 150, it's another thing. So I wanted to give you a couple of examples of productive assignments that I've used in online classes. So back in January, I was working with some of the pedagogicos in Peru, and I was doing an online course for teachers, well, actually for teacher trainers who were spread out all over the country. And we were using Edmodo as our platform. And for one of the things I wanted them to study and understand, I asked them to draw their own infographic. I asked them to draw something that showed how these different ideas related to each other and the sequence. Now, I gave them some choices. They could actually, get a piece of paper and a pen and draw it if they wanted, or they could sketch it out on their phone or on a program on their computer. But either way they did it, they took a picture of it and then they put it in a discussion thread on Edmodo. So I like to use those discussion, the comment threads, and start a discussion post, right? Here's, where we'd like you to post, where I'd like you to post the infographic about this topic. And they could just make something and share it there. And then they could comment back and forth on each other's. And I really liked that assignment because they had to be a little bit creative. And as I went through the different things they had drawn, I could see their understanding. I could see who really got it, who might maybe need a little bit more help in understanding it. And I think that as they looked at each other's work, they also learned from each other, which is another thing that's really helpful in the online environment. When you can get that peer learning going, when students can learn from each other, that helps reduce your workload as the teacher because we all are doing so much in the online setting. So another productive assignment that I could use kind of informally to assess students, or you could use it formally, is Flipgrid. I'm just curious, how many people in here have you ever used Flipgrid? Can you give me like the thumbs up on your video or write something in the chat? Ooh, I'm seeing some no's here. Okay. Okay, so let me give you my 5-minute introduction to Flipgrid. Flipgrid is a website, Microsoft made it, and it's specifically for educators. So you go on there, you set up a free account as an educator, as a teacher, and then you make grids. Grids are what they call classrooms. Within your grids, you record a video where you pose a question or you give some instructions, and then your students record videos to reply. There's a version for computers and there's a version for phones. I actually think the version for phones works a lot better than the computer version. So you can use that as a way to interact without having to write. They can interact vocally, orally, they can speak. With the Flipgrid, you can limit how long their recordings are. So you can make it a 15-second video if you're just asking them to do something very short. I know a lot of teachers have used that for pronunciation practice. You can make it kind of medium length if you wanted them maybe to have a debate. You could have people give their opinion on something and then have other students reply to it. I have used it with 1.5 or 2-minute long videos. That's how long they have to reply. I've used it for reading comprehension. So I ask them to read a very short text or read an article, and then they record what they think it's about. It's just another format to engage other than always typing their answers. And I like it. It can be fun for teenagers. They can add stickers onto it. They can have a lot of fun with it. When I did this most recently with a class, each of my students had to upload 5 videos. So that turned into a lot of videos. I didn't reply to every one of them, but I just kind of made a list and I made sure I replied, I think, twice to every student. Just went through and watched some of them. Another interactive thing you can do, especially if you have live classes sometimes, you could have a Google Slides or a OneNote, depending on which platform you might have access to, that you invite students to create their own slide on before class. So maybe you give them a topic, you ask them to look up something about an animal, or you ask them to look up something about the function that you want to practice that week. And they put it on the slide before class. So then when you get to class, you can be screen sharing, you can be showing that slide, and they're ready to talk about something. It's kind of a little digital show and tell there. I also want to mention using Google Forms. I am a big fan of Google Forms. I use them for everything. One thing you can use Google Forms for is you can actually set it up so that students type sentences in it. Maybe you, someone says, welcome to the Google family, how funny. You can set it up as short answers and have them type sentences that match what you want them to practice. And then once you have closed the form, once the time period has ended, you go into the response tab and you open it as a spreadsheet. Once you've opened it as a spreadsheet, you can sort it by your students' names. So you can really quickly see who did the assignment. You can count how many people did the assignment. And say you want them to do 5 sentences. Well, I have question 1 is a spot for 1 sentence, question 2, and so on and so forth. As soon as I put it in a spreadsheet on the answer side, I can see if they filled all of those. I can count really quickly how many sentences they completed. Of course, I might want to read them in more detail later, but especially if I'm managing a really large group, Google Forms is key. I might say Google Forms is clutch for managing some of those really big classes and large numbers of students. Oh, someone there just said they use Google Forms as a quiz at the end of class. Exactly. And it's so easy if you're doing a live class to just put the link into the chat and then people can click on it. Or if you have taught your students, if your students all have phones available and they wanted to use QR codes, you could put a QR code to your quiz in the middle of your slide. So let's shift gears just a little bit and let's talk about feedback and grading. I think that's one of the big challenges sometimes when we're teaching online. So just like we did before, I'm kind of showing this on a spectrum here. So we have the least time consuming, all the way up to the most time consuming. So on this end, it would be if you grade and check every assignment. On the far other end, it's back to students do the work, but you never find out. So hopefully you're finding a way to be somewhere here in the middle. Some of the learning management systems can automate certain types of grades. Now, of course, that can limit the way you can use them. So I would try to avoid using the things that can be automatically graded for all of your assessments because they're not the most authentic, they're not the most realistic, but they can be very helpful for just checking to see if they understand a concept or where the class is. If you aren't able to grade everything that comes in, you really have kind of 2 choices here, and you can combine them as it works for your group. On any assignment, you might pick a sample of student work. So if I get 40 answers in, I'm going to try and read maybe 10 of them, just to see what were the common errors. And I'm not doing this to give grades. I'm doing this so that I can give feedback. So on our next session, or maybe I just post something. I post something and say, hi, I saw a lot of people were struggling with, and I give them some more resources, or I re-explain it in a new video. The other option that goes more toward grading is if you do need to grade student assignments, do you grade every single one of them? And you have to think about ways to make that fair. Are you just pulling them at random? Well, maybe you grabbed a really easy assignment for one student and a really hard assignment for another. So I would think through how you want to make that work. But sometimes you have to pick what you're going to grade along the way. And in all of this, we don't want to lose track of formative assessment. So formative assessment, our good friend. Again, it could be fully automated to some extent if your learning management system requires students to get a passing grade, to have a minimum grade, for example, on a quiz. You could set it up to be semi-automated, where if they score below a certain number, they get a list of additional resources or they get a follow-up so that they can go learn some more. Ideally, we're still doing teacher-mediated formative assessment, the same as we would do in the classroom. We look through how students did on an assignment, and we use that information. We use it to build, to adapt, to recreate and redirect where the class is going. So some of the types of formative assessment that you might use online could be quizzes. You could do discussion board posts where you ask students what's not clear to them. I think it's Johns Hopkins University refers to these as like fuzziest point posts. So they ask students specifically, rather than posting about what they understand, post about what's least clear. Depending on how you set that up, you might even be able to have students answer each other in this case, because what's less clear to someone might be more clear to another. When you're teaching at a distance, having check-in points or drafts on a longer project can really save a lot of pain. I just finished a big lesson planning project with I'm doing a teacher training course, and I tried to set it up so that they were checking in with me early on about their student population, then a little bit later about the next step, and a little bit later on the step after that. So we didn't end up 2-3 weeks into the project, and then I find out someone's completely lost. Of course, because the teacher can't be everywhere, setting up a system of peer review. If your students are engaged enough, if you can put them into smaller groups, you might have to teach them how to help each other. Or you could leave it open, like I said before, on the discussion boards where they can kind of share their expertise. Depends on the age and the level of your students. And of course, we never want to forget the power of self-assessment. Students can use a checklist. Students can reflect on their own work. Teaching students to be autonomous learners is a big part of being successful in distance education of any form. So if we can encourage them to reflect on what they need more work on, but then encourage them to share that information, we can use that to build our classes formatively. When it comes right down to it, someone might ask me, how often should we be giving feedback? And I mean, the ideal would be at every step for every student. But like I said before, sometimes you might need to create a rotation and give students a general expectation of how often you'll be looking at their work. Now, some teachers don't want to say, I'm not grading everything, because then they worry students won't do everything. I prefer to kind of be honest with my students about what feedback and how regularly they should expect to receive it. So it depends on your relationship with your students. I like to also, if possible, let the students choose a piece that they are particularly proud of, that they want me to look at. Or on the other hand, if they have something that they're struggling with, if I can set up a way where they identify what they want me to look at, that can focus my attention where they need the most help. As we're talking about feedback and we're talking about grades, don't forget about the positive example. When your students do something great, highlight it. Throw a comment on their Google Doc if you can. In fact, if possible, maybe contact them privately and ask for their permission to show their work in class. I did this a couple weeks ago, and I had a student who had been kind of struggling to meet some deadlines. There was a lot of stuff going on in this student's life. And the student turned in a really, really good example. Like, I could have used this as an example of what I wanted on this assignment. So I contacted the student before our next class and just asked, can I show this? Do you mind if I show this to your classmates? We'll do it anonymously. And I will tell you, that student was just beaming, was glowing. Like, even though it wasn't identified to their classmates during the class, when I screen shared it, when I put it up there, I know that built that student's confidence, and it just, it encourages their engagement. We want to always bring the positive. So Matilda is saying I'm referring to the role of the tutor. And really, when we're in the online space, tutor and teacher, we end up wearing that hat. It overlaps a lot. So that was a great segue there, because coming back to those kind of essential 4 things that I said we needed to have online learning, to have this distance education. I want to pause for a moment and think, where is the teacher in these 4 steps? What is the teacher doing? If you can think of ways that you as a teacher are facilitating, are creating these opportunities or guiding these, could you type them in the chat? Let's just take a moment and think here before I move on. How is a teacher involved in how students access their assignments? How is a teacher involved in how students access resources and how students ask for help or clarification? And obviously, we've been talking a lot about how you might keep track of where students are. As a helper, as a guider. I mean, teachers always wear a lot of hats. Ooh, as a role model. Yeah, as a facilitator. Yeah, go ahead and type all your ideas in there. As a mediator, as a guide, exactly. So as a teacher, we wear so many hats normally, but here in the online environment, we wear probably even more. So as a teacher, you're developing the stuff for your class. You're doing materials creation, whether you're the one going and finding resources and putting them together, or you're making videos that explain what to do. Students are probably going to be looking to you. I know my students are looking to me for how to access their learning management systems, how to access their materials, how to access their assignments. Sometimes I end up being tech support. And that can be a little bit challenging to stay ahead of, but it's key, because if our students can't access the materials, it's kind of stopped the process right there. So Marco, I see that you've raised your hand. I'm going to ask, can you go ahead and type in the chat here? Something that we haven't touched a lot on in this webinar, because it wasn't really my topic, but I do want to highlight, is that as a teacher, as a distance teacher, you're going to have to provide some guidance, maybe even some training and advice for your students on their study habits, on how to be an autonomous learner. I used that phrase earlier, and I saw in the chat some people looked a little suspicious about it. But this is something we have to teach our students, how to engage with the materials, how to recognize, oh, I understand this, or I don't understand this. Some of those metacognition skills that we were always hoping to develop in class, as well as scheduling and organization. Unfortunately, when we're doing distance education, a lot of that responsibility falls on the students. So we need to think of ways that we can teach them the skills, their study habits, so that they can be successful. Those are skills they can learn. And it usually, doesn't fall so much in our pedagogy, but in the distance environment, it really does, because that might be the key to student success. Of course, as English teachers, we are still clarifying the content. We're still being a role model in English and teaching them about English. We're engaging in tracking and feedback. And I don't want to forget the role that motivation and encouragement plays. We've all had very motivating teachers in person. We can have motivating teachers online as well. For most of those, communication was key. Actually, let me go back a slide here. So looking at this list, how many of these would require you to communicate with students? So materials creation, the actual creation, you don't have to communicate with them, but helping them with access, helping them with their study habits, clarifying information, tracking and feedback, motivation and encouragement. Yeah, all of those require either one-way or two-way communication with students. So someone in the chat is mentioning the role of parents in all of this. And of course, we always want to be partners with parents. However, this is a new situation for all of us. So most of our students' parents don't have any experience with online learning any more than their students do. So, talking about the habits that you need to be successful for online learning, those look different in some ways than the habits you would need to be successful in face-to-face learning. So, this is something that I think is new for all of us. So, the better resource we can be to our students and perhaps also to their parents, that can be a key to success there. So, let me now jump forward to this one here. Proactive and frequent communication is to distance education what classroom management is in face-to-face classes. What do I mean by that? When you're in a classroom face-to-face, you have to have good classroom management or the learning is not going to happen. You might be the most brilliant teacher with your pedagogy, with your knowledge of English, but without classroom management, it's what you need to facilitate the learning. In the same way, proactive, frequent communication, that's what allows us to do at least 5 of the 6 things that were on that list of key activities that teachers are doing. So establishing a communication plan, finding creative ways to communicate with our students, at least one directional, but as often as possible, back and forth, a two-way communication. These are keys to our success in the online environment. We're going to really briefly head out to the breakout rooms again. So right now we're going to talk about communication. So I'd like you in your small groups to discuss how much communication do you currently have with your students. And I know this is rapidly changing because we're all pretty new to this. Can you identify if it's two-way, where they can talk to you, or is it just one directional, where you are giving them communication? And then using the tools that we talked about earlier, the learning management system, meeting software, or another tool, what's like one concrete way you could grow the communication, you could add more to it? So Herman, can we send everyone out to break rooms here again? You should be seeing a join invitation. Go ahead and click on join. You'll be in your small groups for about 3 minutes this time. All right, if you're still here in the main channel, hopefully you are seeing a join invitation. You can click join to go into a breakout room. Or if that isn't going to work on your device, you could just use the chat feature if you want. Right now, do you have two-way communication with your students, or is it just one directional? Do you have any ideas from things we've talked about today, ways that you could increase your communication with your students? That's okay, Day. I know internet connections can be unpredictable. So as much as you can stay here and participate, I'm glad you're here, even if you can't head out to the breakout rooms. All right, looks like we're getting everyone back from the break rooms here. The breakout rooms. I keep calling them break rooms, like they're the place you would go to drink a cup of coffee. The breakout rooms. So as you come back into the main channel, if you could please remute your microphones, and if you want to turn your cameras off, just a reminder you can, up to you. All right, looks like we have just about everyone back. So really some of the keys in all of this is that as teachers, whether we're face-to-face, whether let me unmute myself there. You are muted. Okay, can everyone hear me right now? Yep, okay, good. That was a bit strange. All right, so as I was saying, kind of in conclusion, one of the keys to being a successful teacher, an effective teacher, is our ability to build relationships. You all are probably really good at that because you do it in your classrooms. As we move online, that still becomes one of the core features. We need to organize, we need to utilize, but we still need to proactively build those relationships. So kind of just to look back at everything we said today, I would encourage you to really identify and classify the different learning management systems that you're using. We had a wide variety here in this group, everything from Schoology to Teams to Edmodo to Moodle, all of those. So know your system and what kind of things it can do for you. I would encourage you to organize, to plan for those 4 things that we talked about: the access to assignments, the access to resources, a way to ask for help, and tracking and feedback. Decide if you're going to flip your classroom or not. It's a small thing, but you want to stay organized. Include ways for students to produce English, to use it productively, to express themselves, whether they are recording something on Flipgrid, whether you're using Google Forms to make sure that they've written enough sentences, whether they are uploading their work, taking pictures of something and just sharing it into a comments box. Build a balance so that you are balancing between checking for completion and still trying to measure objective progress, and continue to build relationships within your class community. So I want to thank the IFD and the CCPA for inviting me to be here today. This has just been a pleasure. I want to leave you with a couple of additional resources here if you want to go deep dive into this more. That first one is just an article that has a bunch of different ways to use Google Forms. I think, like I said before, I love them. I think they're very versatile, good for organizing. And the second one is a webinar that was held in Peru about a week ago. And that professor, he was talking about distance education as a whole and kind of how the history can help us now. So if you are interested, dive in and find either of those, and just keep doing it. We are all going to move closer and closer to being really competent distance educators as we move out of the emergency quarantine teaching box. Thank you all for having me here. Herman, I'm going to turn it right back over to you.
Okay, thank you very much, Rachel. Thank you all for joining. This was our last session for now. Like I put in the chat, please remember to make sure you complete the survey with your names in order to get the certificate. Also, we are going to be able to share with you the links to the videos of the former presentations as well as this one. That's going to be happening next week for sure. I will also like to encourage you to follow the pages, like the social media pages for the CCPA, the embassy, the EFD, and also I know that Paratiso is about to start a series of trainings, free online trainings as well from this Saturday and on. I'm gonna be sharing that information as well through your emails. And before you leave, to as we always do, get a last picture with our presenter. If you can put on your cameras, and we're gonna do the screenshot. And thank you very much for your participation. So if you need to stop sharing your screen, Rachel, and then we'll be able. I'm gonna be able to see everyone.
All right, there you go.
Oh, once.
Family photo time.
I'm gonna put the photo. That's awesome. I just love to see y'all. Okay. I'm gonna say we're gonna start in different sessions.
Are
Many.
you turning on your camera, Herman?
Should I? Oh, I don't want to. I will. I'm still with my
You
hat.
don't have to. It's always optional.
All
I
right.
respect your
So
choice.
shut up. Okay, so three, two, one, and smile. Okay, first one. Now we're gonna go with our second page. Three, two, one, smile. There you go. Can you hear the click?
Mhm.
And the last one. Three, two, one. There you go. Perfect.
Fantastic.
All right, so we're gonna keep in touch. You already have my email. You have my work phone as well. If you have any questions, I believe that next week we're gonna be able to share all this information again with you.
Yes,
Very much.
just one single thing to Rachel, if I can.
Oh,
Sure.
Rachel, Canvas, I'm pretty sure you know about it. Canvas can fit in all three categories you mentioned before, right? Because it has everything integrated.
Canvas is primarily a learning management system, but it has a lot of features that you might otherwise go to tools for. Does Canvas have integrated meetings these days? Like the live meetings as well?
It was supposed to be added.
Okay. I haven't taught on Canvas in a little while. I know that with Teams, I put Teams in both lists because Teams has the learning management system where you would store your files and make your assignments and group everything. But then they also have the live meetings, just like, the equivalent to a Zoom meeting. I don't know Canvas quite as well, but it's possible that it might meet more of those, definitely.
I used it once for I think it was certificate I got from the embassy, and it was really good. I
Oh, cool.
actually love it. It could be a really useful resource for teachers and students here, but I think you pay for it, according to what I know.
I know it's really popular with universities in the US. It's probably one of the most popular ones for higher education, but I believe it is pay if your classes are above a certain size. Small classes, there is a free version, but I
Yeah,
forget
there is
what the
one.
student limit is.
Exactly, it is a limited version. Thank you very much, Rachel. Sorry to
Of course,
interrupt.
thanks for being
Go
here,
ahead.
Marco.
all right. So we do we have any
We're
other
free to leave, right?
Mhm.
comment?
Okay. Nice to meet you, Rachel.
Bye.
Real good. Okay, so you're free to go then. Take care of yourselves. Bye bye.